Prescott of Amazon Web Services and our moderator, Ariel Diaz of FedEx Latin America. Welcome.
Thank you, Maria Lourdes. I have to say, that conversation we just heard was quite remarkable, and I'm glad that it was recorded because I think we should all listen to it again. Very inspiring. Thank you, Dr. Ely. Thank you, Maria Lourdes. So for the first panel discussion today, I've got to tell you, it's quite a pleasure for me to be joining you. For quite some time, we've been promoting within FedEx having our women leaders come to this, and I've done a pretty good job at doing that, but not actually showing up myself. So this is the first time I'm attending the Women's Hemispheric Network event here in Miami. And thank you, Maria Lourdes, for, I think, putting me on a panel to force me to come, which was good. But truly a pleasure, and quite honestly, I am not only honored but humbled to be in the presence of this very impressive slate of women leaders. We have one woman leader in trade, Jennifer over there, and I'm going to try my best. But listen closely, because I think that a lot of what we're going to talk about may have not been talked about in other network events, and that is policy and the rigors of policymaking and our roles in influencing and shaping that policy. So the title of the panel is Women Advancing and Shaping Latin America's Policy Future. And before I introduce my esteemed panelists, I'll share a minute to give you a little bit of insight as to what we're going to be talking about. As you know, in Latin America, our policy landscape is rife with complexity and lots of volatility, with swings in the political pendulum from time to time that too often result in discontinuity, sometimes radical divergence in policy and regulatory initiatives. Shaping policy requires great dexterity, patience, and perseverance. Fortunately, despite the policy challenges, many markets in the region remain very attractive for growth and for investment, including some of the sectors that are represented here, certainly on the panel. The session will feature female leaders and will focus on their work in policy, particularly driving economic transformation for their companies and various stakeholders across the region. Their leadership is shaping equitable and sustainable growth, fostering development, and advocacy, and advocating for policies that directly impact businesses and communities across the region. Championing change in key sectors, our colleagues are creating a lasting impact, empowering communities, advancing economic resilience across the region. So let me introduce our esteemed panelists. We have Sally Ng, Senior Vice President and Head of Business and Legal Affairs for Telemundo Enterprises and NBCUniversal International Networks. Good morning, Sally. Roberta Braga, Founder and Executive Director of the Digital Democracy Institute of the Americas. Good morning, Roberta. Bom dia. And Jennifer Prescott, Director for International Trade and Tax for Latin America Public Policy for Amazon Web Services. Good morning, Jennifer. I wanted to start out to each of you with the question. Of course, each of you brings a unique set of skills and perspectives to policymaking across the region, from tech and media to trade and digital democracy. I'd like to ask you first to introduce your role as a woman in leadership and how you contribute to shaping the region's policy future. And we can start first with Jennifer.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Ariel, for that introduction. And just good morning, everybody. I'm super excited to be on this panel. It's a great group of women, and I'm excited for the conversation this morning. So I have been at Amazon for 5 years. It's actually my anniversary this week, marking 5 years, which is exciting and shocking in some ways. Time flies, by the way. And before joining Amazon, I had a long career in the U.S. government. Most of that was working at the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative, negotiating foreign trade agreements. And that was definitely an amazing job as well, which I enjoyed. And I think that policymaking is an area that women are uniquely positioned to do well in, because it requires being a really good listener. You have to really be able to understand what somebody wants and needs, and what what a win looks like for both sides, and know where to compromise and prioritize. And I also think women are amazing problem solvers. And that's another big, big part of being a good negotiator, being a good policymaker, is being able to solve a problem. And so I think women are really well positioned in policy making. And I was very fortunate at USTR to be surrounded by a majority of female leaders, actually, at that, sort of senior executive service level to learn from, as well as just lots of amazingly smart female and male colleagues and collaborators. And I feel like Amazon is a very, very similar environment to that as well. And so it's just been an amazing opportunity for me to lead the Latin America public policy team, and also work on the global trade and tax policy set of issues as well. And the issue set is just, unparalleled, I would say, and growing more interesting and complex by the day. Everything from AI policy and how governments around the world are looking to set guardrails on the development, the deployment of artificial intelligence. Energy policy is also very top of mind for our company, and skilling policies. That's another area that we look very closely at. But the other fascinating thing about Amazon and this role at AWS is, because we're so customer obsessed, the policy areas are also what's important to our customers. So, for example, we have lots of large financial services customers, right? We have, Nubank, Inter and Co, that have been built, on AWS. And so we pay a lot of attention to how financial services policy is developed, so that it can enable our customers, right, from startups to large institutions, to really be able to harness technology, be that cloud, be that artificial intelligence. And so there are lots of really interesting policy areas that I didn't think originally, that I would work in, but also obviously cybersecurity and other security policy. So it's such a rich mix of policy areas, which I enjoy a lot, and just the overall mission of bringing more technology to more businesses, more government customers as well, and helping them understand how to really leverage that technology to be able to boost productivity, and to be able to, in the case of governments and public sector customers, right, be able to understand how to use that to better deliver services for their citizens. And so it's just, it's been a really exciting position and role and ride, if you will. And so maybe I'll just stop there.
Thank you, Jennifer. That I sympathize. I think we all can sympathize with that, on particularly having customers, constituents, and communities largely shape or even drive our policy and our policy advocacy, right? I mean, at FedEx, we move 18 million packages a day. Think about how many customers are speaking through us when we speak to government. So, Roberta, I'm coming to you. Speaking of constituencies and communities, same question. Tell us a little bit about how you introduce your role as a woman leader and how you contribute to shaping the region's policy future.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Good morning. It's really good to see so many of you in person. I haven't seen in years. So my background's in public diplomacy, journalism, and global security. And I've had what you'd probably call a non-linear career trajectory. I've worn a lot of different hats in private sector and think tanks, now at a startup nonprofit. All of the roles that I've had have contributed somewhat to policy, usually in also in an indirect, I guess, way, you could say, often through research that informs policy, through convenings that bring policymakers together, like today's event. I've never had a direct government role that informed policy, unlike Jennifer. So the way that my roles contributed have been very I think, around the margins. I was at the Atlantic Council for many years. I got to wear a lot of different hats inside the Atlantic Council as well, working trade and foreign direct investment projects, working election integrity projects. Then I moved on to doing something that was unique. I worked at a company called Equis Research. They do polling of Latino voters in the United States. They brought me on to build out a department that would work to counter disinformation impacting our communities. And it was from there that I spun off the organization that I'm currently leading, the Digital Democracy Institute, DDIA. Our mission is to create a stronger internet for Latino communities. And we do that through research, capacity building, and policy. And I would say that one shapes the other, shapes the other. So the research that we do, we are actually trying to measure the impact of online harms on Latino communities in the US, and then bridge build between the experiences both in research and interventions and policy in the US with Latinos and in our region, Latin America. So to give an example of how we've influenced policy, last year, our inaugural year, we ran 3 surveys, each of 3,000 Latino adults in the US. And we wanted to look at 3 things. We wanted to see how much people were seeing and believing different narratives, including false and misleading narratives. We wanted to see how much people trusted different policymakers, stakeholders in elections and democracy, excuse me. And we wanted to measure to what extent regular everyday Latinos in the US were adopting and using AI, and what they thought about the impact of AI on their lives, on the job market, and what they thought about regulating AI. And so the results were really, really interesting. For example, only 15% of our communities in the US were adopting AI in March on a regular basis, mostly ChatGPT back then. That percentage went up to 20 in September. But interestingly, over 66% of people were extremely worried that AI would impact their jobs. And around 68%, if I'm remembering correctly, thought that it was urgent that we regulate AI. So it was something that we shared with policymakers to show them the gaps. We also shared with them the findings on trust and narratives. And because back then, both in 23 and 24, policymakers were really thinking a lot about how they could regulate what we would say is misinformation online, but really like all the issues around it. We shaped how they thought a little bit about what they should and shouldn't focus on. For example, should not focus on regulating content that people say, but behaviors could be actioned against, or holding platforms accountable for certain transparency outputs or moderation standards, especially between English, Spanish, and Portuguese. There's a huge asymmetry. So it's things like that that we've done over the years.
Thank you, Roberta. You know, we had a chance to just briefly chat the other day about a trust index that Edelman publishes every year, which I read, I know you read, many of us here have read that, and how important, you know, perception is, particularly around media, but other sectors as well, including government and private sectors. So turning over to you, Sally, same question. Tell us a little bit about how you, your role in women in leadership is helping shape the region's policy future.
Well, thank you, Ariel, and so great to see everyone. Thank you to the council for the invitation. I'm a big fan of the council for so many years and this amazing program. So I'm Sally Ng. I have been with NBCUniversal for the last 13 years. And before that, I've been very grateful because I've collected a number of best practices from the best major studios around the world, including Fox, and also Viacom, that is now Paramount. Before that, I was in private practice. I'm a lawyer. And I will say that my journey has been very entrepreneurial, to Ms. Dr. Illy earlier. I joined our organization when Comcast bought NBCUniversal. And at that moment in time, when it came to our international business, it was pretty segregated and in a way outsourced. So when I came into this role, we essentially saw the opportunity to continue to grow our business internationally and being able to really drive that economic push. So my lens has always been very much of how do we continue to drive the business? How do we continue to create an equitable space to ensure that as a foreign company, we have a fair playing field to continue to grow? And I have been fascinated, especially in the last, I want to say 5 to 7 years with the digital convergence, because I think when I started in media, we had a template. We knew how to make money. It was advertising sales, subscription fees, and it was very linear in nature. And that has changed because of consumer habits and how our end customer now wants to essentially watch content, which is what we do by the very nature of here at NBC Universal. So I have seen from rights have many different definitions. I've seen from a policy perspective whether we as a foreign company can go in and conduct business. Are we allowed to do the same thing that a local market entrant may have? So many trade issues, IP issues in terms of when we talk about IP creation, which is at the heart of our business, being able to tell our stories, tell as a storyteller, whether it's fiction or scripted or unscripted content, being able to share that IP around the world without big rocks, taxation, or lack of IP protection. So many different things from privacy, so consumer protection, because we have shifted our business model to be multi-platform. I want to say that it has been an amazing journey in my career, and I think like from my esteemed colleagues here, we have to continue the conversation because I feel we have a lot of common denominators, but my lens has always been very, very much from how to drive their business, whether by opportunities or how do we look around the challenges with a different lens.
Excellent. Thank you, Sally. I'm gonna stay with you for a bit because I wanna delve further into how is your business and how is your role as a woman leader helping shape, create talent and develop talent, creative talent in the region?
So my role overseeing essentially the whole Pan America's legal and business affairs strategy for the organization, it's really, really shaping the way we conduct business at the end of the day. It's really, really important to have consistency. It's really, really important to understand how the whole cycle of the business works. I believe that, roles that were very, very siloed from, historically, that no longer really works. You truly need to understand how the entire operation, and I instill that in my teams and even in my peers when I speak and also with leadership to ensure the consequential decisions that they are making. So as a woman, I feel that we are excellent communicators most of the time. We read the room really well. Like I say to my kids, I have 2 kids. I have eyes in the back of my head. And I feel that we do provide an edge that I think that we sometimes don't, I want to say sometimes we take it for granted because most men are more linear and about the journey. We talked, Maria Lourdes talked about really enjoying the journey. We really can see what are the series of steps that we need to take to accomplish. And sometimes that's really unconscious or subconscious. And I think we could do that really beautifully.
Thank you, Sally. Roberta, I'm going to turn to you. Speaking of trust, tell us a little bit more and maybe share some examples of how your role and your organization is helping to protect democratic values and build trust in today's evolving digital landscape. Give us some examples.
Some examples. Okay, so one is listening. So I think the most important way that we can approach any trust building is through listening. The way that we're doing listening at DDIA is mainly through polling and surveys and focus groups. And we're about to start a new project called Conversations with Latinos, where we use qual boards and interviews to really dive deeply and to understand what is it, for example, about content online that sticks in people's heads. Why do people go to specific messengers? For example, last year we learned that it's not necessarily while we're passively scrolling on our phones the case that we seek out specific creators, for example, where I know a lot of us get our news and information these days. People don't often remember the names of the people that they like online, but they remember their behavior, and their behavior generates trust. For example, people noted, oh, I really like this newsmaker, this person that tells me what's going on in the world. She does research. And when she shares what she's found with me, she draws things out on a whiteboard and she tells me where she got it from. And that's why I trust her. Or other people have shared values. My brother, for example, really likes chess. He watches chess creators on YouTube talking about chess content. But the chess creators also talk about things that are happening in the world. And he trusts his chess people because he knows they're there for that primarily. And they connect dots that he then reads up on later. So I think the listening piece is really important. We share out these findings with institutions and policymakers so they can really understand where people are coming from. And we share with people findings around, for example, for a while, I think we were talking about countering online harms as an ecosystem, as an industry. We made a lot of assumptions about people. For example, people may, quote unquote, fall for falsehoods online because they don't have a lot of education or because they don't have a lot of access to correct information. And through our research, we found that's not the case, actually. The three biggest factors that contribute to whether people see and believe falsehoods or misleading content online are usually they have high levels of interest in politics, they consume a lot of partisan news and information in bubbles, and they're already conspiratorial in nature, which means there's a very high distrust of elites and institutions. And so I think we've learned a lot listening to people that we can then share that I think changes how policymakers can approach talking to their own constituencies, not just in election seasons, but also thinking about regulation and legislation and how to keep us safe online.
You know, one thing that came to mind is never underestimate the stickiness of digital communities. I know that from my kids as well, right? I mean, they build bonds digitally as strong as physically, right? Speaking of digital communities and digital infrastructure, Jennifer, to you, what role can digital infrastructure play in building economic resilience in Latin America? And what policy changes do you feel are most needed to support this?
Well, digital infrastructure has really added tremendous, I think, opportunities and economic growth in Latin America. And we're really proud as AWS to be a big part of that. We actually did worked with a third party FTI to do a study on just 6 countries in Latin America last year and found that that cloud and digital infrastructure had contributed over $195 billion in GDP to the region. And that's just a lot of opportunities for everything, again, from startups that many have become unicorns, and big multinationals, and again, public sector customers, governments as well. And we have been really excited to be one of the first cloud providers to be in Latin America. Our first full-scale region was in Brazil in 2011. And so we've been in Brazil over 10 years. We've invested up to 2023 about $3.8 billion and contributed to 10,000 jobs in Brazil. And just last year, we announced expanding our digital infrastructure in Brazil to better serve customers there with an additional $1.8 billion investment to continue to grow our digital infrastructure there. Earlier this year, we launched our region in Mexico with President Sheinbaum, which was super exciting. I think our investment has really fit well into her digitalization agenda. That's a $5+ billion investment that will support over 7,000 jobs in Mexico. And then just last week in Chile, we announced that we're going to launch a region there in 2026, and that's a $4+ billion investment. And again, all of this is very much driven by our customers and what they're asking us for. But to your point, Ariel, we look at a lot of different factors, and policy and the policy environment is one of them. And I would just sort of call out like 4 particular policy areas that we're monitoring, and I think also working to educate policymakers on as well, as we're looking to expand investments in digital infrastructure. And the first, as I mentioned before, now is AI policy. Because how those guardrails that governments are putting in place, how they do that, and whether or not it's risk-based, turns out to be very, very important to our customers as well, because it influences how they're going to be able to leverage that technology. So, for example, in Brazil right now, there is an AI bill that has moved through the Senate, is now in the House. We're watching that very, very carefully. A lot of the regional governments have been understandably looking to the European Union, for example, and the AI Act there. I think that's a cautionary tale, because we're still seeing how that policy is playing out, how it's impacting, in particular, startups and smaller companies in Europe. There was a study recently done that said that 40 billion of the 10 billion, that companies are spending is on compliance with that AI Act, which is really a difficult statistic for small and medium-sized companies and startups in particular. So that's a really important area. Energy policy is another super important area, because, of course, data centers, the cloud, AI, you need energy to sustain all of that. For Amazon, renewable energy and the sustainability of our energy source is very, very important. We have a commitment to be 100% renewable, and we met that commitment 3 years ahead of schedule just last year. So looking at the energy mix, the availability of clean energy is super important. How governments are investing in grid modernization, very important, from here in the US to governments across the region and the globe. Skilling is a super important policy area as well. The World Economic Forum has actually said that the skilling gap in Latin America is the largest of any region around the globe. And so being able to look at governments and how they're thinking about skilling and their willingness to partner with private sector companies as well to fill those skilling gaps. We have a commitment at AWS to provide free cloud services to the original commitment was to 29 million people by 2024, and we exceeded that. We trained 31 million people, and over 2 million of those are in Latin America last year, and we're still working towards those goals and have a lot of really interesting local partnerships that I could talk more about. But the final area of policymaking that we're looking at is how governments themselves are looking at cloud, and do they have cloud first policies, right? Are they looking at how to leverage cloud versus invest millions more in on-premise data centers, right? That then they have to maintain, they have to upkeep. So do they have cloud first policies, cloud procurement policies, ways for them to actually look at how they can leverage cloud? That's another really important area of policymaking.
I thank you, Jennifer. I couldn't help but think, as you were laying those 4 areas out as policy priorities that you all are monitoring, how they deeply connect with the policy priorities that governments are looking to implement, right? And are looking to make, right? Policy making many times matches the policy monitoring that the private sector is looking at. And I think one of the skill sets that certainly this group, but I would say most of the women leaders here can bring to that table is connecting those two, conversing and converging on those two. so that policy priorities the private sector is pursuing aren't disconnected or detached from what governments are also pursuing. So thank you for that. I know we've got only a few minutes left, and I do want to leave some space for Q&A. So I'm going to ask you to wrap it up, maybe a minute or two, and starting with Jennifer and working our way down. What advice would you have for young women seeking to influence public policy, whether from inside government, business, or civil society?
Well, so my advice is one, just do it. Policymaking is, I'm pretty passionate about it. And I think it's an amazing area where you can make a tremendous impact. Again, I think women are uniquely positioned in this space. And I would encourage everybody to seriously look at public service as a place to start or even continue your career. Working for a government or a public institution is an amazing opportunity to gather skills and responsibility. You will be, I mean, when I was just a super junior negotiator at the Commerce Department, when I first, started my career, it was amazing the negotiations that I got to work on, chemicals treaties, biotechnology treaties. They enabled me to learn so much and deep dive into some of those issue areas, but also, again, to be a problem solver, to be a good listener. Those are the kinds of skills, like how you deep dive, how you listen, how you learn to find compromises to really complex problems. Those are the skills that will be translatable and be a multiplier to your career, like for the length of your career. Also really good in motherhood, I would say, because there's no better negotiating lesson than having toddlers and now teenagers. And so very, very translatable.
Thank you, Jennifer. Roberta.
So I have so many. And I am in my 30s, so if you all do have advice for me, please give it to me. I really identified with what you said earlier about laying out a lot of different risk scenarios and then overthinking through, what could potentially happen. That's something that I've done a lot in my career. And so my biggest piece of advice is to just do things scared and to just make a decision and go. Like a lot of young women come to me often and they ask, like, well, what if I do something and it's the wrong thing? And what I've learned is, especially because my career has been somewhat nonlinear, is that nothing is forever. And if you make a decision, you'll get experience from that decision. If it's not something you love, you can pivot. And it's actually not going to be the end of your career or the end of the world. The other thing is, I think there are a lot of I don't know, behaviors or things that we're taught when we're young that hold us back a little bit. I read a really great book that I do recommend to all young women now a few years ago by Sally Helgeson. And I wrote this down. Let me see if I remember. It's called How Women Rise. And it lays out 12 different behaviors, I think, that women also usually hold that can hold us back in our careers. And when I read it, I was just highlighting everything in speed. And I talked to friends and they said, oh yeah, me too. I do that too. I do that too. So yes, it's not about making ourselves like the men around us. It is about competitive advantage, absolutely. And there are specific habits, I think, that we can try to overcome because usually we are just as, if not much more prepared than many people around us. And it's just our minds that keep us from taking leaps or taking risks. So.
Inspiring. Thank you, Roberta. Sally, we'll close with you.
So I would summarize on two things. One, find your passion, because that's going to make your life a lot easier and your job and your journey. And number two, you need to have your cabinet. That is advice someone told me very early on in my career.
What type of cabinet are we talking about?
So your cabinet is essentially a group of tools and or people that will help you to succeed and will help you to validate whatever it is that you want to do to ensure that you continue to be on the right path. And don't be afraid to make mistakes, but having that cabinet whenever you have a question, and you have to choose your cabinet very well. Could be a small group of people, could be books, could be just a psychologist. It could be so many different things, but just have it very close to you, because sometimes you just need someone or a tool to be able to validate where you want to go. And that has proven to be instrumental and so important in my career, because it's the only way you can ensure that you have a team behind you. And we are all humans. We get things done through people, and having your cabinet is it's an instrumental tool for success and growth.
Wonderful. We may have a few minutes for Q&A, but before we go to Q&A, thank you so much. This has been wonderful. If I had to do it again, I would love to come work for you. Okay. So thank you. Inspirational. Questions?
Hi, everyone. Margalit Edelman. I'm a pharmaceutical and Latin America policy expert. So most recently, I was at Novartis, and we commissioned a lot of research on the workforce in Latin America. One thing we found, for example, was absenteeism due to illness and health concerns, for example, migraine in Mexico. And then on the other side of the coin, we found that, for example, people delayed or deferred or didn't even do basic healthcare preventative measures like mammograms, because particularly women, they either were working or busy with child or parental care and could not take time off to care for their health. So my question for you is, from a policy perspective, what should we be doing both to influence governmental policy to support better health and preventative health care? And at the same time, what can companies or private sector do to make up for that shortfall? Because as we know in Latin America, there's a lot of inequitable health care. And in many cases, you do have to rely on out-of-pocket health expenses or private health expenses to take care of your health.
Margalit, who of us would you like to have?
I'm
a
hoping to
response
take
from?
a stab at it. And I mean, there are lots of answers to that really, really good question. But I would say, one area that we've actually seen make a real difference, I think just in the US and to even me personally, but I think across the region is, the one development as a result of COVID was that more governments enabled more digitalization of healthcare services. So like the ability not to have to go all the way to a doctor's office, right? And make it, maybe that's across town, which in Miami can be an hour, but maybe it's a really long distance in rural communities. And so, having the ability to be able to get medical attention through like an online, call has really, I think, enabled more access to healthcare. It's not perfect because unfortunately not everyone has a cell phone or a computer where they have that type of connectivity. But I think that it was an advance that helped, in particular, I think busy women and mothers, right, who otherwise would have had to take that additional time.
Can I just add something from a very different perspective? So something that we do on is online monitoring. We monitor narratives in English and Spanish that go viral. And we also monitor public WhatsApp groups. But something that we did recently, we studied cancer misinformation online in English and Spanish. And because the internet is borderless, there was some in the US and some in Latin America. And what we found was that there are quite a lot of misinformative narratives out there about cancer and other health issues that we just don't clock. And it really runs a gamut from, preventative measures to cures to causes. Things like, if you starve yourself, your body will eat your cancer cells. Or, drinking warm water can help, or injecting spider poison. And usually what we find is that some study or another, or some actual grain of truth was related to what is being said and got kind of like decontextualized and went around. And so one of the things I think is I feel like medical and pharmaceutical and other care providing institutions tend to be very far away from people. People don't get a chance to spend a lot of time with their doctors. They spend like 20 minutes at most. My mom is going through something right now in rural Wisconsin. She has to drive 3 hours to see a cardiologist because there's only ever a traveling cardiologist that goes through the city where we live. So I think there's also something to be done about bringing healthcare providers closer to the everyday person, whether that's investing in local health clinics or what have you, or more outreach. Oftentimes the information that's available for people is very academic in nature. It's really hard to process. My mom has had to spend like hours and hours reading through articles and things. She uses ChatGPT to help her sometimes, but it's not so helpful. So yeah, I think something along the lines of just making sure that the providers themselves, the experts, the information is more readily available and accessible to people.
Hi there, Kate Clemmy, Southern Pulse. Brief question. There's been notable changes in the DEI policy landscape. What is the impact of that for women in business in Latin America, and what can those of us in this room do to counteract some of the negative externalities?
That's a great question. Who would like to tackle that one?
I'll start. I think that diversity perhaps has a new definition, but many of us are now simply just saying it's all about inclusion. And what can we do to ensure that that inclusion continues and starts with us when we're hiring, when we're making decisions. But I think it's important to continue an open viewpoint. It's I think it's really, really important to understand where individuals add value, because from my perspective, it's all about inclusion.
So I'll add a really real perspective to this. I mentioned we're a startup, we're 2 years old-ish, almost. A lot of the funders that work in our space have begun sunsetting specific areas of work. DEI, democracy, gender, information integrity. So this is something that we're feeling strongly right now. I think there is an important aspect of kind of reframing the services that you provide to connect it to what it is that people are prioritizing right now, but that does only go so far. So I don't know that I have like a real answer for you. It's something that I'm going through right now. Diversifying the partnerships, the funders that you go after, thinking kind of outside the box about monetizing certain products, making new partnerships. A lot of funders come to us and they say, well, we'll consider this if you literally integrate your 2 companies together, your like NGOs together. That's a huge decision people are making. So I don't know, it's a tough environment right now, but those are some thoughts. I may be coming to some of you in a few months asking for new opportunities, but we'll see. We're really trying to be creative about it.
Being a female in the policymaking space, but I was wondering if you have a point of view on how useful is it to integrate a gender perspective into policymaking, right? Like in terms of trade, AI, content, technology, environment. Is there a role or a use into thinking of gender issues when designing and implementing policy? And if so, how do you do it?
Were we going to take 2 questions together, Maria Lourdes? Okay.
Hi, everyone. My name is Alexandra Martinez. I work for Perspectiva Public Affairs. I've been working in public affairs and policy for a long time now. I think my question is similar to the one that was just asked into the first question, in the sense of coming from the private sector. Oftentimes, the clients that we work with and in consulting work, we become somewhat experts in policy and the policies that we're trying to advance and to advocate for. So my question is similar to the first and the last, where how can we, from both the private sector and the business perspective and the business strategies that are developed, how can we include this gender equity strategies and policy making in what we bring to governments and what we advocate for. So how can we kind of include that vision in the public affairs strategies that we develop internally?
I have thoughts, but again, I'm not the policymaker in the room. From the listening piece, something that we've learned is that women often face different challenges, whether that's on engaging with information online because they get attacked in specific ways, or whether it's healthcare. I, at this very moment, would say the way to do it would be to integrate those unique challenges into the core of the policy itself, not necessarily branding it as gender-specific policy priorities. I don't think that'll get us very far in this year. But regardless, I feel like it should be at the root of the policy itself. And you can just talk about how it impacts different communities. We don't even necessarily have to shout from the rooftops that it impacts women differently. So that's just my 2 cents from a non-policy making perspective.
Yeah, and I would just say that I think it all comes back to problem solving. Like what are the like if there are particular problems to be solved for a particular gender, like what are those and how do you dig deep to understand what the problem is that you're trying to solve? You know, to your point, not necessarily, you know, branding it, you know, any particular thing, but rather just, again, think about, and Roberta, I think, you know, what you're doing, it sounds like is an amazing service of bringing data to help policymakers be able to solve that problem. And I think that's what we also try to do at Amazon is to help educate policymakers in these, especially these really new areas like artificial intelligence or quantum computing, like being able to bring that data to help them then problem solve is a super important contribution.
I would just add, I love what you just said, Jennifer, and I would add that don't always assume governments actually know what the root problem is, right? Sometimes it
really
is incumbent on us to figure that out, to do that work for them, tell them what we think it really is, and then connect data with our own policy priorities to the end goal, right? How does that contribute to the end goal? But big lesson learned, do not assume governments know what the real problem is.
We have so many conversations, I can't tell you, with policymakers where they say, you know, we're doing this, we have this bill. Okay, what's the problem that you're trying to solve? And oftentimes they do struggle a bit to pinpoint that exact problem. But once you understand it, then you can work backwards.
I think it's been a lesson learned for me in DC. Like, governments are run by humans. Humans have specific psychological tendencies. And just like all of us, I feel like people, when they start to panic, they move on vibes, or they move on what they've been hearing. And because they're so busy, especially Congress members and congressional staffers, they just don't have the time to be doing the deep learning. And so it really is up to us to kind of change the narrative on what they need to focus on.
Excellent. Thank you again so much. Thank you to the audience for the great questions.
Hey, we are a coffee break. So we will see you back here in 15 minutes. Thank you.